interview skills. We're excited to be able to bring this information to you guys. It is going to be a little more interactive today, so be prepared to share if you're comfortable with that. You can always turn your camera off if you don't want us to see while you're sharing. But I'd like to introduce Christopher Pappy. So he has been our facilitator for these 3 webinars, and we've really enjoyed being able to work with him. So I will let you take it away.
Terrific. Thank you, Jessica. And thank you to the Yountville Chamber of Commerce. I think you guys have been terrific in staying ahead of the curve and dealing with the workforce issues that we have and getting up to speed. Yountville is absolutely my favorite town to visit for dining and wine tasting, just because it's you feel safe, you know, and everybody's compliant and doing the right thing, and you know, all the tourists that come, they really love it up here. So it's been fantastic, which, you know, it provides the basis of our conversations over the past 2 weeks. How many of you have were on the LinkedIn profile and also the resume building webinar? Yeah, I recognize you, David. Well, if you haven't, I'm going to do a brief review. The whole idea of our seminar today and the last 2 weeks is in preparation for the job fair that we're hosting, which will be an opportunity for those of you who would like to hire talented staff for your tasting rooms and or wineries and or businesses, as well as candidates who are looking to fill those roles. And the job fair is going to be really cool. What day is it, Mallory? It's coming up at the end of the month or the beginning of October?
It is next Thursday, October 1st from 11 to 12:15.
It's kind of like speed dating for jobs, which will be fun. Bouchon's iPhone. Oh, okay, cool.
We're very excited about it.
Yeah, it was really well done last time. I think it'll be even better. I think we have, what, 20 companies that are looking for staff?
We are actively seeking more hiring managers, but we have quite a nice little group of them at the moment. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, anyone knows anyone who's interested in participating as an applicant, we have a few spaces left. And
if you don't already know Mallory McEligot, who's just spoken and will be co-hosting this webinar today, I've been following her successful career over the past 10 years and especially impressed with the work that she and her associates have done at Bang Napa Valley by Appointment Networking Group. Really a fantastic resource for the community, for wineries, and for candidates looking for work and just to network. So in preparation for the job fair, we hosted 2 webinars prior to this one. One was building your brand on LinkedIn, and the second was building a resume for success. And today we'll be talking about interview skills. And what's interesting is that all the information we've discussed in the first 2 weeks leads to what we're going to do today and how you can manage your success in the interview process. The most important aspect of a job search, in my opinion, is the building of your own personal brand, who you are, how do you think, what have you done, what have been your successful exploits in the past, what are your goals and dreams for the future. All of those necessary attributes and dreams that you have it's very important to communicate those. And one of the best profiles to do that on is LinkedIn. And in the first series, we gave you a bunch of tips as to how to improve your profile. Perhaps, Jessica, we could send everybody on the webinar today a link to the prior 2 seminars.
Yes, you'll get a link from me or an email from me at the end of this with links to all 3 of the webinars, as well as information to sign up for the job fair next week.
Perfect. And the reason the interview is probably the last phase is because in my experience, there's a lot of culling of candidates that goes on prior to the interview process. So poorly written resumes in the round file, not the right prerequisites filled for the job in the round file. So let's just assume today, for today's purposes, that you've done all the right things, you are qualified for the job, your resume looks really sharp, So when you go into the interview process, this is really your job to lose in a way. And that's the way I would recommend that you think about it. Go in with confidence, go in with an agenda. And if you've done all the proper branding of yourself, if you've thought long and deep about what you really want to do in business, what you really don't want to do in business, what you honestly can do, and what you pretty much know is outside of your skill set, if you've defined clearly those parameters for yourself, then what you've done is you've done this exercise that's allowed you to A, recognize the opportunity when it is presented to you, and B, you've really directed the interviewee or the interviewer towards what's important to you by virtue of all the strengths you've listed on your resume. One of the things we talked about in resume building is create, in your LinkedIn profile, you've created your brand story. In the resume, you've put taglines that can expand into the elevator, which is what usually happens in the interview process, which is authentically created from your brand story. So a quote from Mark Twain that I love to recite is, he wrote a letter to his friend, said, "I wrote you a long letter because I didn't have time to write you a short letter," referring to the fact that distilling what your brand story is down into a cogent, small, short story or essay or elevator pitch is infinitely more difficult. And then even more thought is required when you take that short elevator on what your best accomplishment was at this job, and then create a bullet point so that it's on your resume and succinct. And what you really want them to do is focus on the resume. It's some of what we're going to discover today is not only good for you as a candidate, but those of you in the management ranks, when you are interviewing, it's really important to kind of observe on the flip side what would be the best practice and how to get the most out of the interview. I remember for years interviewing, sometimes it was such a chore because you're doing so many things and maybe you're not prepared for and you go to this laundry list of questions, which is, it's essentially, if you have a predetermined laundry list of questions to ask the candidate, you're really asking for the lowest common denominator in a person. So it's much, much better to kind of look at each individual resume and really focus your questions towards that resume. And that's the art of a great resume, is when you have bullet pointed everything about yourself, and that keys the interviewer, even if the interviewer is not prepared. Let's say he or she is running back from a meeting and gets in her office at 5 to 11, the interview's at 11, and they don't have a pre-scripted interview. Well, I've got your resume, so let's just go through the resume, which is a perfectly okay thing, especially if you've created the content in a way that's going to create your storyboard and tell people how you are. All right, so that's the lead up to this. Now you're in, and we've established that you're the right candidate for the job. We've established that you're qualified for the job. There's a number of different ways that the interview can go. And usually it's a little bit of tell me about yourself. It's a little bit of, you know, what's made you, what's brought you to this, this opportunity? What about the job description are you captivated by? What do you bring to the table? All of these questions are designed to ferret out your interest level. It can also be said that if you've made it to the interview process, the interviewee is really not wanting to waste their time. That's why you never hear back when they call out your resume. They throw it in the wrong file. You never get a letter back saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, but we did not wish to consider you at this time. We've gone another direction." That'll never happen. So you can just assume that they want this to be a success just as you do. So one of the first things to do when you break the ice in the interview process is to obviously show up to the interview being neat, professional. Today I dressed the part, which is a business button-down collar shirt. It's kind of business casual. No need to really wear a tie or a suit unless you're applying for a CEO position at a corporate headquarters in San Francisco. That you might want to consider wearing a suit. But for our industry, sometimes overdressing can be a little bit of a distraction. One of the things we're going to talk about today, one of the recurring themes will be distractions, eliminating distractions from your look to the answers that you give. In the onset of these questions, what do you bring to the table? These are designed to elicit a true response as to who you are as a person and why are you sitting in front of me today. Really important to understand that that's the break the ice, and what you want to do is you want to stay consistent to what you've said in your resume. And if you've done a resume where you've said, if you're interviewing for the tasting room manager position at Silver Trident Winery, they're going to ask you what makes you so interested about this job. Well, I've always wanted to be a tasting room manager at Silver Trident Winery. That may be a little bit much, but you get the picture. The idea is to really be specific and keep your answers somewhat brief if you can. It's all part of the art of selling and the art of selling yourself. When you oversell, sometimes you miss an opportunity. You misread the body language. You misread what they're truly asking for. I like to use this phrase: if they ask you what time it is, don't build the clock. Just tell them what time it is. And if you feel that you need to embellish, or if they want more, then you can expand. It's really important to not become tangential in the responses. The best interview will be one where they ask you lots of questions. So if your answers are too deep, that reduces the amount of questions that the interviewer will have time for. Usually they'll carve out 45 minutes to an hour for the interview. You want to make every second count, and you want them to get to know as much as possible about you and your resume. Going back to the resume, I see many resumes that are vacuous. Vacuous meaning you could interchange anybody into this resume and it would be the same. Very general descriptions of what a person's done with no associated metrics, with no associated challenges, with no description of the job that you've done in the past, with no description of the company you've worked for in the past. These are all important things to talk about. You've worked for some really great people. If you've worked outside of the industry, it's really important to give the interviewer a little bit of a snippet into what was the company that you worked for, how big were they, who did you work for, how long did you work there, what was your overall impression of the job, how did you succeed, what were your challenges, why did you leave. Those things can be covered in very, very cogent terms without having to go into too much detail. And then what happens is the interviewer will then expand upon any of those topics based on their interests. Remember, they should be directing the interview, but you want to direct the content, okay? Because it's you we're talking about. Many times interviewers will ask you, do you have any questions about the job? Do you have any questions for me? And sometimes that comes in the beginning. I like to pose that in the beginning rather than at the end. And I think it's a very valid question. It shows that you are interested. So the response will be, you know, I was noticing on your website that you have a series of wines that I've never seen in stores before. Do you have a bifurcated strategy on wholesale versus 3-tier? Great question. Gives you an idea of how they manage their brand. You might want to ask them anything that shows that you've done your homework, that you've looked at their website, that you've tasted their wines. If you're interviewing at a winery, by gosh, get down there and taste the wine, do a secret shopper, you know, be knowledgeable and be interested. So there's a whole list of things that I have that are kind of rules and do's and don'ts, and I don't want to go through this like it was a shopping list and bore you to tears. But I would like to make this personal and ask you, all of you on the webinar today, what have been one of your biggest challenges that you've experienced in the interview process? What's a frustration for you? How can I help maybe mitigate what that problem may have been? I've done a lot of interviews over my career. I started in hotels in my 20s and worked my way into sales ranks in the 3-tier, managing sales team. So over the years, I've done a significant amount of interviews, but it wasn't until I started recruiting 4 years ago with in a business environment, business consultation, that I really started to learn about it. It's not easy. It's not easy for the interviewer, and it can be difficult for the candidate. So our goal here is to make things easier for you to direct the traffic and direct the conversation to what you want to talk about. So in that vein, is anybody willing to either pose a question or share a story? I think it'd be worthwhile, so it's relevant to your case. I talk too much. Brooke Logan says I talk too much. You can unmute yourself too. Jessica, can people unmute themselves?
Yeah, please unmute yourself if you want to go, and I'm not afraid to call on people. So.
Okay, perfect.
But Brooke, do you mean you talk too much during the interview? Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah, like somebody asks me a question and then I find myself just going on and on and on and on. And I can tell that I'm like, okay, you need to stop. And sometimes I can, it just from years of experience, like it happens a lot.
You know, one good way to help in that is practicing conversing with your significant other or best friend or someone that you trust, and have conversation and pause. The art of pausing between, phrases. It gives the signal to the participant that they can speak rather than listening to you go on and on. My wife will tell me all the time how I can be better at that. Listening skills and allowing people to pause and then not jumping in when someone else is talking.
I have that problem too.
Yeah, it sounds like it's all related. So, well, that's what you really want to pay attention to that in the interview process. Just remember when you walk in there that you want them to ask you as many questions as possible. And the only way that will happen is if you keep your answers brief.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Anybody here ever experienced an interview where people seem to jump to a conclusion about you, like right off the bat?
Yes. Yeah. And I find that's often coupled with not referring to my resume. So what you said about the interview where there were a lot of prepackaged questions. So it will happen that I go into the interview and really hoping that this is a conversation about, my skills and my relevance to the post. And in fact, it's just a bunch of prepackaged questions and they don't refer to the resume. And I'm the one who's having to sort of say, well, if you look at my resume, you'll see that. So that's really frustrating.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that, Leah, thank you for the comment. Is it Lee? Lee, sorry.
Lee, yes.
Lee, yes, Lee. Do you find that that's, in looking back on your resume, do you think that there's two things you can do for the resume that will make it more compelling for the reader of the resume?
I mean, my resume is continually a work in progress, but, and I'm sure if I handed it to you, you could make some changes. But I mean, I do concentrate on the metrics and keeping, I will tailor the resumes to the job as well, if necessary. So it seems to me that problem is kind of more from that side, and maybe they have quite a few candidates to get through, and it's just quicker to have the set questions.
Yeah. That's great, and thank you for sharing that. I recently interviewed a woman for a vice president role of sales and marketing for a winery, and it was interesting because she had more questions than I had questions, which was a little off-putting for me, and she didn't end up getting the job. She interviewed with the hiring manager because they thought she was overqualified. But in a way, I think it was a good process because she really wasn't all that interested in that job. And it was clear that she was focusing on driving the interview questions by asking some questions. I had one hiring manager complain to me about a candidate who, when asked, "Do you have any questions for me?" the person said, "Not really." And they took it as an insult. What was interesting was when I spoke to the candidate afterwards, the candidate told me that they had gone over quite a bit over the time allocated, and she got the impression that they were that she was overstaying her welcome, so she didn't want to impose with a question. So that's kind of interesting, and I think that just leads back to having the ability to listen and read the situation. You know, put your emotional intelligence into gear. Everybody here familiar with emotional intelligence? There's a book out called Emotional Intelligence 2.0. I can't remember the author, but it's quite good. It talks about what emotional intelligence is, kind of the opposite of intellectual IQ. IQ, which is kind of hardwired as your intelligence factor, but emotional intelligence is your ability to read signals, to be aware of a person's personality, to be aware of your personality and how you mirror and pivot according to that person's cadence, the person's desires and goals from a conversation, a business transaction, you name it. That's where you exercise your emotional intelligence. And the interview process is a really good opportunity for you to exercise good emotional intelligence. Jessica's texting something. Is that book? Oh,
That's the
okay.
book.
Yeah, oh, there you go, from Travis Bradbury. That's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
very popular book. And one of the personality tests, if you're interested, I can administer for you guys if you're interested. It's called the Drake P3 system, and it measures you on above the midline or below the midline, how you're wired when you're at work and also when you're at home, based on dominance, extroversion, patience, and conformity. A really great test. It gives you some ideas of how you're wired. It's called the Drake P3. And if you want to email me at some point, I can talk about whether it's something you'd be interested. If personality assessment is really interesting, because if you know you're wired a certain way and you know that somebody you're looking at is wired a different way, you can pivot accordingly and have a better outcome in your interview process. So let's talk about some things that you don't want to do in an interview. Throwaway phrases is a real danger zone. When someone asks you a question that may be a bit difficult to answer, a lot of times we'll revert to, oh, that's a really good question. And that's not something you want to say, because you're not trying to compliment the interviewee. You're basically, what you're doing is buying time to figure out the answer to the question. So it's really better to slow the cadence down in the process, think deeply about your answer, and tell them the answer to the question. Even if it's not exactly what you're positive about, it is, you know, the truth will always come out. And speaking of the truth, one of the most annoying characteristics I find with people, not only in an interview, but mostly in business, you ask them a question and they say, you know, let me be honest with you, or to tell you the truth. And the first thing my mind goes to is like, well, have you been lying to me this whole time? You know, why are you saying that? I'm assuming you're going to be telling me the truth. We're in a serious interview here. So those are tactics that don't work well. And they have, even if the interviewee, the listener is not aware that, like I am aware about that, it'll be a tacit or even an unsaid, the non-spoken result in their brain the brain will process it, even though they may not recognize the comment. So try to keep those throwaway phrases out. It's really important to make a good first impression. And I'm going to flip that for those of you who are going to get this job and then are going to turn around and start interviewing people. It's always a good idea to not let yourself fall into the trap of making a first impression of somebody because they didn't like the way they combed their hair, or the color of their blouse, or the color of their jacket. Try to remove yourself from making first impressions as an interviewer. By the same token, you as an interviewee, as the candidate, you'll want to remove any distractions and keep it real easy. Make the interviewer's life easy. You know, go to the interview in a pair of khaki pants if you're a guy, and a blue blazer and a button-down business shirt. For a woman, you know, same thing, business suit, open collar, not very simple. If you're going to wear jewelry, very simple. Nothing distracting, no crazy looks. Plain blues are great with a patterned shirt, but only one thing a pattern. You don't want to be mixing your patterns. I'm not a fashion consultant, but I definitely believe that the less noise in the room, the better chances you are to shine your personality. And you really want to make rapport with the person that you're talking to. So somehow you really need to engage, look at the person in the eye, and find out if there's a connection, if there's chemistry, if there's engagement. Because remember, in building our resume and building our LinkedIn profile, the goal is to find a good job fit. And job fit is for review purposes, are two aspects of job fit. One is the actual job and skill fit, and 40% of your success in, oh, good question. I'll get to that. Sorry, I got distracted by a text. 40% of your success in your next job is going to be based on the skills that you've acquired in your career. 60% will be the culture fit or the job fit based on the culture fit. What is culture fit? Culture fit is, as I define it, is the trajectory of the candidate and the trajectory, the growth pattern of the hiring manager or winery. If your career is going in this direction and their business is going in this direction, that's 60% of it. How do you ascertain that? Well, by your career goals. If you're looking to be a CPA, and this company has junior accountants, senior accountants, controllers, and CPAs in the same firm, then it's a logical place for you to go and work, because you're going to strive to be there within that company. And then all of that means nothing unless there's some real motivation by both parties. I really like this person, and I think this person could knock it out of the park. And you have the same feeling. This is a great job. It's in my wheelhouse for a salary. It's more money than I made last job. It's a good career move. It's upwardly mobile. Love it. If you both have that feeling, then this is going to be a great, great job for you. And that's how I define success in a job, is let's make it a really good career fit. A players always want to do something new. They always want to expose some sort of gap that they need to learn in their career. And the trick is to not make that gap so wide that it's untenable for the interviewer to hire you. So choose your posts wisely, and then let them know a little bit about what your aspirations and goals are. And hopefully they'll bring you along for the ride. And if a person is not willing to be open-minded in that regard, then that might not be the best place for you to hang your hat. If a person is not willing to read a 3-page resume, maybe this person doesn't have the mental acuity and discipline to be detailed in their own workplace. Maybe that's not the place you want to be. So it's really important to kind of gauge them, and that's where the emotional intelligence comes in. There was a question about Zoom meetings. Great, great question. I'm so glad you brought it up. Many of your first interviews will be on Zoom. So Zoom there's a few really general rules about Zoom. One is that you want to be at the meeting early and log in and make sure all your audio and your background is looking good. I would refrain. I use the virtual background often because I just like it. I don't need people to see my closet. And I don't have a lot of people pose, put up their first edition of Chaucer's in the background and a flower vase and all that. And that's really nice if you're broadcasting on NBC. But if you're trying to get a job, a neutral background is a really good way to go. Clear white or beige wall in the background with nothing to distract the interviewer. Really important in Zoom. The other important thing to do is to be, just measure that your whole face is in the view, play around with your monitor and make eye contact with the viewer, which is the little green dot at the top of the monitor. That is the camera. That's what you want to be looking at. That's what I'm not looking at you in the audience, Because if I did, I'm looking at Mallory now, then I'm not looking at the subject. Does that all make sense?
That's great. We have another question. It's very challenging to be called for multiple interviews and there's still no mention of salary. How does one deal with this?
Excellent, excellent question. All right, so as some of you may know, California passed a state law that prohibits hiring managers from asking you what you made in your last position. Unless, the caveat being, unless they are willing in the same conversation to share with you their budget, so that there's full transparency. They're not, the idea of that law was put in place so that employers wouldn't use the previous salary as a negotiating tool. Perhaps they thought they would pay 100,000, and if you came in saying you're making 75, all of a sudden they would change their budget to go down to 78. You know, that's unfair. So as a recruiter, I like to broach the salary position, the salary question early. And so to answer your question, it's absolutely good protocol to inquire about the salary. And you don't have to be totally specific. So if it's true that the state requires you to provide transparency as a hiring manager, then I would suggest, and I think it's a good rule, and I would suggest you offer the same transparency back to the potential employer. So early on in the interview process, if you're going through if you know that you're going to go 2 to 3 interviews in, then in the first or second interview, maybe the second interview, the first interview is more about discovery. The second interview is more about, okay, let's really dive in. Now I know I like you for this job. I know that you have the skills. I know that you're qualified. I know that you look the part. Now I want to really dive deeper into your resume. That's like part 2 of the interview process, let's say. That's a really good time to say, John, I've in reviewing, this position, I did a little research and I found that the salary range for this position is 85,000. I have an interest in being in that 85 to 95 rate. Am I in the ballpark for you? And then they'll come back and say, oh my gosh, no, actually not. No hiring manager wants to go through the whole process and at the end of it, realize that they're $30,000 off. There's no way to bridge that gap. Now, if you give them a range, let's say I had a very good candidate gave me a range for an accountant position. She said, I think it's worth somewhere around 80. I would love to be in the range of 75 to 95. Now, I knew that the hiring manager was in the range of 70 to 90. So I said to her, I said, yes, you're in the range and we can continue to talk. And then at one point, when you know that you're down the road and you're pretty close to an offer going to be made, one of the things you can say is, look, I will let you know if something else comes up. I'm not trying to leverage you, but I'm in the market and I've been looking around. So here's my range again. If you'd like to know what I made in my prior job, and if it's, that might be competitive and maybe even higher than this job is offering, it's not uncommon. You left a job for not any reason of your own. You were getting paid 105. You have already ascertained that this job is probably going to be 95. And for you, that's okay. Doesn't mean you want to go low. It just means it's okay. So if you offer to the hiring manager, say, look, it's a little bit below, but I'm interested in this job and I believe I can knock it out of the park, and down the road, we can look at bonuses and remuneration accordingly. Here's what I was making. Here were my benefits. Exactly. I had full health, medical, and 401k matching at 4%. I had a $750 car allowance. I had benefits only for me, not for my spouse. If you give them all of that information, if they don't ask for it, they should ask for it. If this is this is after your third interview, you're close. Now, what do you want to do? You want to close this deal, right? That's the art of selling yourself. So you don't want to let them off the hook. And the best way to do that is to show them exactly why you're ready to take this job. Here's what I did. And what it does, if you go into that detail, it'll allow the hiring manager to go to their owner or the owner to think in their brain, okay, let's see, I'm short by $5,000. How can I make that up? Oh, I know. We have this amazing employee bonus where we get $5,000 worth of wine every year that you get for free. That's a benefit. Or whatever the benefit, I have a better health plan. My health plan will save you $5,000 a year. Okay, right there, you've just bridged the gap, and you've given the owner a chance to be creative. I had a fellow who was $10,000 over on a regional manager for an importer, and he wanted to go up another 5,000, and he was still $10,000 away from what the the hiring company wanted to pay. So the manager got real creative. He gave him a little bit better bonus, and then he gave him a signing bonus of $5,000. And he thought that was such a nice thing to do, because it showed the candidate that this manager really liked him. And it's been now 2 years he's been on the job. I keep in touch with him. He's knocking it out of the park. He loves his job. He loves the culture of the company. And he's probably making $5,000 less in his first year than he made in his last job. But guess what? Now he's already up 10% up above what he ever made in his career. And he's on a trajectory to grow. So it's all working out. I have a question. What if the job you're interviewing for has a much higher salary than your last job? Great question. So don't offer that information unless he or she asks you for it. And then first of all, if you know that they're offering a higher salary, then that's probably a moot point, because when they've disclosed that this is what this job pays, and you say that would be great, I don't know that they even need to know what you made in your last position. So it's a tricky one. I don't think I can't imagine them coming back and offering you less based on that. David, I'm going to get back to you on that. I'm going to talk to David Newland, because I've never heard that question come up before, but it's a great question.
I will say in the past when I've had that happen, I just don't say anything. They're like, oh yeah, that sounds great. And just move on.
Just move on. Yeah.
Do you have any examples of ways to really nail a panel interview as opposed to just a singular one-on-one person?
Oh, great question. Yes, I do. If it's a panel, it's usually a board of directors of some sort, or a board of advisors. And this was taught to me by Dan Zapponi, the CEO of Cuvées Winery. He said, there's always an alpha on every board. Find out who the alpha is, and then make sure that that you're being very aware of what that person is looking for. And oftentimes the alpha will try to set some people up for failure, whereas the rest of the crew just want to get this process done. They want to hire somebody. They really like the person. And it's usually the alpha that wants to trip people up, because they're very hard driving and they only want the right person. It's got to be perfect, and they've got to be, all to my spec. So just try to figure out who that person is by their body language, by their questions they ask. If they ask really probing, hardcore questions, if they're highly dominant, that's a personality trait of an alpha. If they speak a little higher in cadence and tone than the rest of the team, that's a good indicator. Another question.
We have another question. What if they ask questions you just can't answer? It's a good question.
Then I would say I would take notes and ask them if it's possible to get back with you. Let's say it's a fairly innocuous question like, all right, you said that you grew sales 40% last year. What was the starting number? What was the final number that represented 40%? Now, it's highly likely that you may not have those details. Many times when we leave our jobs, we, out of respect and our NDAs, our confidentiality agreements, We're not taking Excel files. We're not taking thumb drives. We might not have that information. In the webinar last week, I mentioned, and I think Lee made a very good point about her resume. It's ongoing work. That's really the best way to have a good resume. Keep track of your metrics. You know, you come in at the end of the year, let's say you had a bang up year and you increased your sales, just make some notes on your resume. 40% up, start at a base of this, I work for this person, so and so, put it in there. That way you don't have to depend on spreadsheets and P&L statements to get your numbers down the road. Did I answer that? I got a little distracted in my own brain. I did? Okay, good. What else? I go into an interview with my portfolio and mention to the interview panel, hope you don't mind me taking notes. Oh, absolutely. It's part of my list. I haven't gotten to all my list yet. It's absolutely a very good look to walk in with a briefcase and a notepad. Absolutely. Winemakers, owners love it. They know that you know, that's the body, that when you do that, you're essentially telling them, I'm going to start thinking about the ways, the 30, 60, 90-day plan, how I can knock it out of the park. Because when you really know the interview is going well, is when the manager says, you know what, I'm going to give you a homework assignment. I'd like you to come up with a 30, 60, 90 plan. And then I'm going to have you interview with the owner and then the HR director, or the owner and their assistant. A lot of times there's people in ancillary roles that have no decision-making ability, but they're really good at reading people. You know, if the CEO of the company has had his personal assistant with him for 20 years, and he wants you to meet this person, then fantastic. Have notepads, absolutely. Great question. Great thing to do.
We have another question. Should you always send thank yous? And this is
absolutely.
it. Interesting one. Okay.
100%. Handwritten is good. Email is good as long as you keep it short and keep it something compelling in the subject line of the email so they read it. It doesn't go into spam. Yeah, if you have their email address, but it's very easy to get their physical address, and it's very easy to bang out a little card thanking them for the time today. And I hope that we may go into the next round of interviews. What should you do if you're told that you are overqualified? Well, you can take that a couple different ways. One is you can take it like, these people obviously don't really value me as a subject because that's just an easy out for them. It could mean that that could be a signal to ask them what they're paying for the job. What's the salary range, so that I can make sure that I'm not wasting your time and I can truly tell you if I am overqualified for that position. And if you really like the job and you really want to make a play for it, even with that kind of a comment, you might just say, well, that's true, but in this particular role, this is what I'm looking to do. I'm not interested in climbing up the career ladder. I'm not interested in, I just got back into the workforce. I was working as an executive, and now, my kids are out of school, and, yeah, I'm ready to, work 9 to 5 and do the job for you. Give them reassurance. It's a tough position. It's not the greatest question in the world. When I look at people, I never think that someone's overqualified. If somebody's making a lot more money and says to you that they'll come down in the salary range, that's a warning flag, because people rarely do that. Very rarely. It just means that they've been out of work for 3 months. And if you do the math, what they were making annualized, missing 3 months, we're already back down to what you're going to pay them. So that's why they will do that. But really what they will do is they will find another job. And you will do the same thing if you're a candidate and you accept an offer that's way below what you want. It's not a good look for yourself. It's better to just take an interim job somewhere, a temp job, knowing you're temp than to accept a full-time job. And then all of a sudden, okay, now you have to go out looking again. And then the first thing I'm going to say to you as an interviewer is say, you know, why did you move from job to job? And you really want to have a good answer. In the sales roles, I know this question might come up. You know, is it okay that I've been 2 years here, 2 years there, 2 years here? Sales roles, especially at the higher executive level, they tend to move pretty quickly. They come in, they do this amazing job, and then they leave. They get hired away, or something in business changes in a dynamic sales role. But here's my rule of thumb, and this is some really great advice. This is worth your time for today. Just if you take away one thing about success in the career, in your career, is if you're an A player, and the fact that you're here on this webinar means that you're an A player, and if you're going to get this next great job because of all the things we've learned, the first year you're going to knock it out of the park. I 100% guarantee that you will knock it out of the park. What does that mean? So in year 2, it means that you've got to compete against yourself. And in year 2, competing against your own great success becomes a challenge, right? And you know, if you raise sales 40% in the first year, you might have to manage the expectation of the manager or owner, because to do 40% over what you just did might be a high bar. So manage that expectation. If you can get it down to 15%, 20%, whatever the budget is, and you hit your numbers. Okay, well, you're going to hit your numbers in year 2, and that's great. But year 2, at the end of year 2, invariably what happens is some side curveball comes at you. A pandemic, a downturn in business, a new boss, a new directive from ownership saying, hey, we've pivoted here, we want to do this. And it's like, that's not what I signed up for. And you're starting to get a little annoyed with the people you're working with. The honeymoon is way over. And all of a sudden you're starting to look from side to side and think to myself, you know, maybe I should be looking for another job. The answer to this dilemma is really figuring out, what is the problem here? What's something that I have to overcome? Figuring out what that problem is and then solving that problem will get you to year 3. And it's like in an airplane, when you take off in a storm and you get above the clouds, and what happens? It's blue sky, right? And you're like, oh my gosh, it's nice and calm, it's fresh air. That's the feeling you'll have when you solve a major problem that's facing you in the job market, in the job world. And that's a life skill that's super, super, super important. Why? Because when 10 years from now, you're going to look back on that success, and it's going to inform you as to what your future problems and what your future solutions look like. So then in year 3, you're like, wow, I just knocked it out of the park again. And everybody's happy with me. Now you're starting to make some money because you're getting bonus based on the successes. Year 3. Year 4, you start to realize, you know, I really know this job. And it's at that time where you really have an opportunity with a company. A good company is going to use and promote you and have your skills help them grow their business. By year 5, you become known in the industry because year 3, you really figured out, you started to master the art. Year 4, you really start to achieve something. By year 5, you have a body of work that you can put on your resume that is all you. Many times on resumes, people say, I increased sales 40%. The first thing I ask is, where did you start? Where did you finish? If they don't know the answer to that question, they start backpedaling. It means maybe they are fluffing up the numbers a bit. And then the next question I ask is, well, who is on your team? Oh, well, I had a manager above me and a manager below me, and we did it together. Oh, okay. So this 40% is not just your number, it's the team's number. Yeah. Okay. Was there any, dilemmas that you faced? Well, how did you get to this number? Those are real probing questions. And those are the things, if you're going to put it on your resume, you want to direct traffic in the conversation to talk about this major success story. But if it's really not your success, think again about putting it on your resume, because you want to speak fluently in the interview process. You want to wow them. So less is more. We're getting low on time, so I want to just, this is in the unsaid category, but I'll say it anyway. Keep it professional, not personal. Don't fall for the how did you get into business trap, or where did you grow up? And if somebody asks you, tell me a bit about yourself. I'm from New York, and I got into wines in the import business. Stop, full stop. Why? Because people are not interested in your personal life. Plain and simple. They're not interested in when you learned how to play the guitar and that led you to meeting somebody in the wine business, led you to absolutely not interested. They just want to know a little, it's kind of like breaking the ice. So keep it professional. Don't get into the telling of stories. And also one last thing about personal, please monitor your social media content. We all tend to overdo it sometimes on social media. I get it. It happens. It's understandable. But here's what you want to do. You don't want to have your social profile full of political stuff, full of all your personal, who you like and who you don't like. All that stuff is negative. So if you have that stuff up on your Facebook page, get rid of it, you know. So, try to obfuscate it in some way, but definitely clean up your profile. Don't want to have political, religious, politics in your social media feed. Keeping your answers precise. Don't build the clock. Tell them what time it is. Do your homework. Make sure that you know everything there is to know about this company that you can get online or in or from back channels. Here's another technique that people use. A smart hiring manager will, before you even come to the interviews, they already know they like you, they like what they're looking at here on paper. They just want to verify, trust but verify. One of the ways they do that is if let's say that Mallory's applying for a position at Silver Trident, the boss at Silver Trident, the first thing I would do if I was Shane, I'd call up John Conover over at Plumpjack, because I know that Mallory worked at Plumpjack. I'd call up John and say, hey, John, I'm going to talk to Mallory. How'd she do for you? And it's what we call a back channel reference. They're really important to conduct for you as a hiring manager when you're hiring somebody. Get to know who it is you're talking before they walk in the door. That's called doing your homework. So the hiring manager is going to do that, and you have to do the same thing. You might, if you know that I worked for Mark Pope at Bounty Hunter with a company called Chatterbox, which I did for 5 years, and you're going to go down and interview with him, you might want to call me and say, hey, you worked for him for 5 years. What was it like? What are they looking for? It's called back channel referencing. How am I doing, Jessica?
We've got 4 minutes.
Okay, good. You've all been great. Thank you for your questions. Is there any other challenges that you've faced? Any other bonehead things that people have asked you in the interview process that you'd like to avoid? Does the salary discussion make sense to you guys? It was always a problem for me. I always never knew what to do. The books and the stuff I read back in the day was, if somebody asked me what I wanted in the position, I would say, oh, well, I'll leave that in your court. You tell me what you're thinking of paying, because that's the old school way of leveraging. You want to have the leverage in the negotiation. So what we've done, we've de-risked the process. Why we're not wasting anybody's time here. We kind of know where we are. The art of leveraging is when they make an offer. Let's remember, if you get made an offer, what does that mean? It means you're the lead candidate. It doesn't mean that they're choosing from 3 people. They're not making offers to 3 people. That never, ever happens. One reason it doesn't happen is because the job market is too tight. The second reason it happens, nobody wants to pick out of 3. They just want who they want when they want them. The minute they make you that offer, woohoo, now you have leverage. Plain and simple. You are the driver. So what do you do with that leverage? You be very careful with that. You respect it. You ask if I can take this home and speak with my significant other. You say, I need to think about this. This looks great. Thank you so much. I will get back to you. And don't indicate whether you love the offer. Don't tip your hand. And then you can come back with a counter offer, perhaps. And that's not a bad thing. Nobody's going to you're not going to lose it. If they make you an offer and you come back with a counter that's reasonable, no one in the right mind is going to throw you out because of that. What they will do, and what you must be prepared for, is they will come back with a last and final best. What you do not want to do is negotiate further. You have to be ready to accept whatever it is they put at you or decline. But there's no back and forth. That's bad faith. It's not no good negotiating tactics, and it will just lead to a bad work experience. And I've seen this over and over and over again. I've used LinkedIn connections to use a black channel, but do not name drop.
Mhm.
So that's from Debbie. Connections to use as back channel, but do not name drop. Is that your experience and advice, Debbie?
Oh, you're on mute. You can unmute yourself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi. Yes, going into an interview, or if I'm applying somewhere, I like to look at LinkedIn and see if we have anything, a common connection. Then I don't name drop, but I can speak to, something that interests or some background. Like I interviewed with an HR director. It was right before COVID, so they pulled the job. But I knew that we both worked for the same company in different locations. So I was just able to speak to, and it was a hospital setting, and we both worked at hospital, but was just able to speak to the hospital. And then I did mention, of course, it was on my resume about, and just verbalized that I had worked for this hospital. And it's just something that might resonate, that may resonate with them, especially if they've had a good experience.
I couldn't agree more. That's
what I do.
That's an excellent comment, Debbie, and I appreciate it. Thank you for that. LinkedIn is the resource. It really is. It's a business. Keep it to business, and you'll be so well rewarded. Get your name out there. Get yourself blogging a little bit. Original content is king. Talk to people. See who else are friends of yours. You see somebody's interesting, as Debbie said, just go to their connections. Take a look at somebody in their connection, and then you know what you can talk about. I just received from Brooke, a friend of Jocelyn. Thank you so much for these webinars. I'd love to speak at your convenience. Okay, so obviously this person knows that I know Jocelyn because she worked at Treasury, et cetera, et cetera. Perhaps you found that out in my LinkedIn profile. It's a great tool and it's great networking. Don't be afraid to network, back channel, and network when you're not networking. You know, you don't want to be asking for something when it's time to ask for something. You want to have it become more natural. Do your networking before the opportunity arises, and you'll be set up for success.
Awesome. That was a great way to end.
Okay.
Thank you everyone so much for joining us today. Like I said, I will send out an email here in a little bit with the recording, and then also with the other 2 recordings and the information on how to sign up for the job fair for next week, which we are looking forward to. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Chris or Mallory from Bang Napa Valley. We're here to help you guys in any way we can during this super weird time. So thank you everyone, and we'll hopefully see you next week.
Thank you.